Okay, so following on from the first part of this tutorial, we've spoken about how the database works, the database structure, we've spoken about how the search itself works. Now it's time to actually go ahead and write out the code for this. So you can see at the moment I have just an empty HTML page with only a header tag, which just says search. So obviously this is entirely up to you. You can integrate this into your own website. Because the function is going to be in func.inc.php, it's going to make it a lot easier for you to integrate it anywhere you want in your website. So essentially what I've done up here, let's just rewrite that out, is I have started a PHP tag and ended one, and I've said include, and then in inverted commas or single quotation marks I've just included func.inc.php, and you can bring that all up onto one line and it just makes everything a bit tidier. Okay, so now that we've included func.inc.php, we need to include db.inc.php from func.inc.php. So let's go ahead and do exactly the same, db.inc.php. Now in db.inc.php we need to connect to our database. So essentially what we're doing is we're making func.inc.php accessible on this page, but from func we're actually using the search function itself, so we need to connect to our database. So just to keep our database structure, our file structure a little bit easier to follow, I've created these three files. It's entirely up to you, but I do recommend you do it this way. So the first thing I'm going to do is use the MySQL connect function. And this is going to take three parameters, and they're all string data. The first, second, and third are, like I said, string data. The first is your server. So essentially what we're doing with MySQL Connect is connecting to the MySQL server. The first is the host, which is usually localhost. Then it's root for my username, and then my password is blank. So these credentials will most likely be different for you, especially if you're using paid hosting. You're going to find that these perhaps have something appended in front of them. However, make sure you know how to connect to a database probably before you start this tutorial, because we're going to be going into SQL queries and everything like that. So MySQL select DB is next, and what this does is select a database that we're going to be working with. And you can see that earlier when I was showing you the database, my database is search engine. So simply I'm going to connect or select search engine. Okay, so now that that's done, let's go ahead and run this page in our browser. We get no errors, which more or less all the time means that we've connected to our database, so that was successful. And what we can do now is start building up the actual form itself. So under search header tag, what we're going to do is we're going to create a form. We're going to keep the action blank because we're submitting to the same page, and the method in this case is going to be post. We're sending the data as a post data type, and we'll end the form there. So I'm going to create a couple of paragraph tags just to keep everything nicely spaced out. And in here I'm going to create, let's just bring this down a bit, input type equals text, because obviously we want to give the user the option to enter some text. We're going to give this a name of search term, or actually let's keep it simple and we'll say keywords. And that's about it for that field. We don't need to do anything else there, but we then need a button. So immediately afterwards I'm going to create another input type, and this is going to be submit this time, and the value for this is going to be search. This is just what is displayed to the user. Okay, so let's go ahead and preview that in our browser. You can see that we've got our search box up and our search button. Whatever we type in here, we can then click, and the data typed in here is forwarded or sent back to the same page. So remember, we left the action blank. Okay, so now that that's done, we need to come down a bit, and under the form, or wherever you want your results to be displayed, we create a new PHP block, if you like. And in here we're going to need to create a few checks before we actually process the search to func.inc.php by calling our function. So the first thing we need to do is check if this form has been submitted, and we do that using the isSet keyword. and this is going to search for $_post. Remember, we're sending post data, and in square brackets and then in single quotation marks we need the field name, which is keywords. Okay, so now what we're going to do is open a block. So with a curly bracket, open a block, and inside of here we need to actually set this to a variable that we can use easily. So I'm going to create a new variable called keywords, and that's going to equal $_post, and then in here keywords. So we checked for this post here, and now we're setting it to a variable called keywords. So now keywords equals whatever the user typed in. It's just a lot easier way now we can deal with just this keyword instead of keep referencing this. Now there are a few security things we need to take into consideration, as well as sort of chopping things up a bit, just so we make everything a bit nicer. Now we're later on going to be searching if the user's typed anything, and in the case that they just type a few spaces, like so, this is going to be recognized as data. So what we need to do is we need to use the trim function around this posted variable, and what that will do is remove any white space from the left and the right hand side of the keywords. So for example, if they were to type space space flash space space, using the trim, this would just be taking this space out, taking these spaces out, and you'd just be left with flash. As well, if you were to do space 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 space, it would remove all of this, and therefore they haven't typed anything. So we're basically allowing them not to search for just a load of spaces. Okay, so the next thing that we need to take into consideration is HTML entities. Now what we've actually done is we've, in the demonstration in the first part of the tutorial, we looked at displaying the search term that they've actually searched for. So if you were to be echoing out this data at all, you're going to need to make sure HTML entities function surrounds this. And the reason for that is simple. HTML entities is going to take any HTML data and it's going to store it in its absolute form, as in symbol form. So instead of for example, a greater than and then a less than sign with HTML in the middle, it actually shows this out as symbols. So the less than and the greater than sign would be shown as symbols. So if you're not too sure of this, go ahead and read up on the HTML entities function, have a look at what it does, test it out in a separate page, and you'll understand why we use this when we're outputting what the user's typed in. And the next thing is the MySQL real escape string function, and what this does is it escapes any data that could potentially be used for an SQL injection. Because we're going to be using this keywords value here to search directly into our database, we want to prevent SQL injection. So if you're unsure what SQL injection is, go ahead and read up on that. It's important to bear this in mind when we're allowing the user to type anything in that's going to query our database. So now what we want to do is I'm just going to echo out keywords just to test that everything has worked properly. So let's refresh the page. Okay, let's go ahead and type in flash, for example. You can see that that's just translated and echoed out down there. Now what happens if I type space space flash space space and click search? You can see that there's no spaces being appended to this. It's trimmed the spaces down. If we were to type something like that or that equals that, which would be a potential SQL injection, click search, you can see that we've added slashes to this to ensure that it's not translated as a query in MySQL. So we've protected it against these things, as well as something like body bg color equals something, so #000. If I was to click search, you can see that it's translated as exact HTML. Let's go ahead and remove the HTML entities function just to demonstrate that further, and let's paste that back into there and click search, and you can see that it's set the background color to black because the HTML has been taken literally rather than displayed as an output. So hopefully that's cleared it up for you if you weren't sure what HTML entities does. Okay, let's just add that back in. Okay, so now that we've got the keywords, we want to create an array which is going to store a list of errors depending on the errors that we might come across. So for example, if the user hasn't typed any data, or if the search term was too less of characters. So what we're going to do is we're going to be making the limit of, or the minimum characters required for the search as 3. And the reason for this is if the user was to search for A, obviously there would be a lot of results returned, so we need a minimum search term.